doing that. But so that's what tahor means. It means purebred. And the reason why he's bringing tahor animals into the ark is because he's going to give thanks and sacrifice them at the end of the flood. We notice here a little phrase in verse 9, men and females came to Noah. So I don't know if you've seen these movies, Noah movies. There's one recently made that was absolutely horrific. Biblically inaccurate, I shouldn't say horrific. The movie was fun enough, but it was biblically inaccurate because it had lots of monsters in it. But nonetheless, what you see in these, whether the old movies of Noah or the new movies of Noah, is that Noah doesn't go out and get a few dogs and sheepdog the sheep onto the ark. No, Noah just sits in the ark or stands in front of the ark, and these animals are coming automatically 2 by 2 into the ark. They're commanded by God to come 2 by 2 into the ark. So this is a marvelous picture, and I think the text supports this. I mean, the Genesis narrator suggests that God caused the animals to go in. God doesn't tell Noah, you go and find all these animals and take them in, but God calls the animal, and the animal responds to God's rule and just comes 2 by 2 into the ark as the ark door opens. It's a marvelous picture of God's providence to each animal and to Noah. So after 7 days, the flood water came to the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of heaven were opened. Now, this is obviously a comparison to the creation narrative. In the creation narrative, God bounds the seas, and God causes the springs to close down so that land appears. Now it's an undoing of creation. This is returning of the chaos of water into the created creation. And the rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights. Of course, 40 days and 40 nights, by now we should be ringing because we are used to the Genesis narrator. And once we see the 40 days and 40 nights, we think of the 40 years that Moses took Israel in the desert. We took of the 40 days that Christ was tempted in the desert. These 40 days and 40 nights theme rings through scripture. So we begin to see that Noah is here a type for Moses and a type for Christ. So Noah and his sons and the wives entered the ark, and every kind of animal entered the ark, and the pairs of creatures entered the ark. And again, we said the animals were going in male and female as God had commanded Noah. Once again, we find this repetition division. For 40 days, the flood keeps coming to the earth, and the waters increased and lifted the ark. It lifted the ark greatly, and the ark floated on the surface. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The water rose, translated in NIV. The word is actually gaberu, which is actually prevail, triumph, conquered. The waters actually conquered the earth and covered more than a depth of 15 cubits. And what that means really is that the ark can now clear the highest mountain. Everything that moved in the land perished, birds, livestock, animal, everything on dry land that had breath of life in its nostril died. This, of course, is a type. It's a type for baptism. When we get baptized, we enter the water to die so that we come out of the water to be raised with Christ. Here, there's a type for baptism. All the animals are wiped out by God's judgment. And the miraculous thing about our baptism is that we are not wiped out, that we do manage to come out of the water. And it's not because Pastor Ian is very strong and lifts us out of the water. It's because of the mercy in Jesus Christ. Not saying Pastor Ian isn't strong, by the way. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. All along the ground, the birds was wiped out. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. So here we have the remnant theology. Again, we boil down to one person, Noah. The story seems to be repeatedly coming down to one remnant. Adam and Eve have 3 sons. Cain, who was evil. Abel, who died like a breath. And then Seth, the remnant. And all through the text, we have this remnant. All is destroyed, but one is left. We come down to Abraham, the remnant. And repeatedly, we have this theme of the remnant. And it speaks through the type of the exiled people of God. A remnant returns back to Jerusalem. And ultimately, it comes down to a remnant of one, actually of zero. It comes down to a remnant of Jesus Christ. And on that Good Friday on the cross, that one remnant became zero. He died. The Sunday after, this zero remnant came back to be one. And by that resurrection power, this remnant spread out to become the remnant that we now see as the Christian church in the world. Verse 8:1, this is the center of the passage. We say, God remembered Noah, and he sent for a wind over the earth. Again, the repetition of the Genesis creation narrative. The Ruah Elohim, the wind of God, the Spirit of God in Genesis 1:2. There's this a recreation. Once again, the wind of God moves through the earth. Once again, the wind of God blows over the water and clears the water from the earth to make new land. This is a recreation. Of course, this is again a type. 2 Corinthians 5:17, we are what? We are the new recreation in Christ. We are recreated in Christ. The same theology. The springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heaven have been closed. The rain has stopped falling. The water receded steadily at the end of 150 days. Now we notice he's using the number of days as a chiastic tool. There's 150 days here, and you know in verse 24, just before the center point, chapter 8, verse 1, there's another 150 days. The ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, and the waters continued to recede until the tops of the mountain became visible. After 40 days, again, this 40 days is used as a chiastic. It is chiastic to the 40 days in verse 12. Noah opened a window and sent out a raven. It kept flying back and forth until the waters dried up. Then he sent out a dove to see if the waters receded to the surface of the ground. Here, now the Noah story is not a fast-paced story. It's not very slow. It's okay speed. We've covered, pretty much all the flood in a modest amount of time. But now we notice that the story slows down. The narrator deliberately slows down the story. And he always does this to make a point. So let's see if we can pick up what he's trying to do. The dove could not find anywhere to perch because there's water all over the surface of the earth. So he returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and took the dove and brought it back himself into the ark. He waited 7 more days and sent out the dove from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there was in its beak a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the water has receded from the earth. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out again. But this time it did not return to him. So we notice here what is known as a threefold story. And this is one of Genesis narrator's favorite tools. He does it again and again. It's the 3-point story. And it's usually 2 lighter points followed by a heavy point. It's kind of like the drum roll that the backing band does for a comedian. When he makes a joke, they go ba-ba-boom, like that. A classic example will be the Joseph narrative. In the Joseph narrative, Joseph interprets 3 dreams: the cupbearer, the baker, and the Pharaoh, okay? The cupbearer and the baker were interesting dreams to interpret, but it was interpreting the Pharaoh's dream that got Joseph out of jail and into the high position of power that moves the story on. So the 3rd time it happens is a significant time. Again, the brothers of Joseph comes and visit Joseph 3 times. 3 times they come to Egypt. And 3 times Joseph meets them. 3 times Joseph pretends he doesn't know them. 3 times Joseph is moved to tears and weeps. On the 3rd time that Joseph weeps, he reveals his identity and they make peace. So again, 2 times that doesn't get anywhere, and the 3rd time that gets somewhere. And here we have the same pattern with the dove. 3 times the dove is sent out. The 2 times nothing much happens. The 3rd time ends up Noah knowing that there's land and he can come out of the ark. So this is what the narrator is doing with this text. He's slowing it down and he's showing you the threefold action. And of course, we mustn't miss the 7th day. Noah waits 7 days. 7 days for each step. Again, this is another repeat of the creation narrative. We're beginning to find a lot of echoes of the creation narrative in the Noah narrative. And we'll come to why that is in a moment. So by the 601st year, the water has dried up, and by the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. Then Lord God said to Noah, come out of the ark, you and your wives, your son and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature with you, the birds, the animals, all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in numbers on it. Where have we seen this phrase before? Creation narrative. Another hop back to the creation narrative. By now, we must see that this text of Noah is really a repeat of the creation narrative of Genesis. We would have missed too much if we read this up to this point and we still haven't realized what he's doing. He is telling you, Noah is the second Adam. Noah is the recreation. So Noah comes out, and all the animals comes out, and Noah builds an altar to the Lord. You remember I said this, and Camden was not very happy when I said this. I said that when God puts Adam into the Eden, a walled garden where God dwells, and made him work there, Adam fulfills the role of a priest, because a priest is the person who works in the dwelling of God, the temple of God. A priest is the person who builds the altar. So again, we have this repetition of the priesthood role of Noah, as with the priesthood role of Adam. Noah the priest. Of course, the priesthood is one of these types that go all the way through Scripture. It seems to be fulfilled in the Levitical priesthood, which we'll have when we read Exodus, Leviticus. Jesus is called by the author of Hebrews the great high priest after the order of Melchizedek. And of course, Peter in 1 Peter 2:9 calls us what? The royal priesthood. We are the royal priesthood. But this is, I'm going to digress a little bit here and tell you. So Noah's been in this flood. He's been locked up in this ark for a very long time. He's a bit stir crazy like us. He's probably a bit unshaven like me. We're all been COVID locked down too long. He's been locked down for a long time. And it's probably quite stressful. I mean, you'll notice it will be quite stressful later on as we read the story, you know, how his children are. That's why he's stressed out, children. Always a constant source of stress. At any rate, so at this point, he builds an altar to the God. And I call this an altar moment. So when I went to Regent College in Vancouver to study, I left England and I moved away from all my friends and everybody I know really, and go to Vancouver. And for the first 2 weeks, it was fantastic because late August, early September, Vancouver is a beautiful place. It's sunny every day. There's beautiful beaches, fantastic mountains to look over, and it's a wonderful place. By the 6th of September, it started to rain. And, you know, I felt like Noah because it rained all the way until October 14th. It didn't stop raining. There was 45 minutes of sunshine on October 14th, and the next time we saw the sun was November 10th. I really felt like Noah. It was depressing. I understand why Noah built an altar, because he's been depressed for a long time. Long-term rain can do that to you. Of course, it didn't help that the Corset region turned out to be very academic, and I was trying to do Hebrew and Greek in the same year. My whole room is filled with vocab cards. I thought I was going to get some Christian community and fellowship, and it was drier than Hebrew vocab cards. It doesn't get much drier than Hebrew vocab cards, trust me. So it was a very tough academic year. And I was beginning to miss England. I was missing everything about England. I was getting quite down on myself and quite depressed. Every morning I would drive into Regent, and it's about a 40-minute drive, and I'll listen on the radio. And there's this Christian radio that did a show. And it's a show about a family who are struggling. The dad has been fired from work. The teenage daughter is rebelling against the family and is dating a non-Christian guy and is being dragged to parties and so on. The youngest son is failing out of school, is getting into fights. So all of this is sort of making the family argue. So over the dinner table, they'll argue. When they're driving to somewhere over the weekend in the car, they'll argue. And every now and then, the father or the mother will stop and say, let's pray. And in this show, they will pray, either to give thanks for food, or they will pray because the car is broken down by the roadside while they're arguing. And as they pray, things change. Well, obviously, this is a fictional story, but as they pray, things change. The peace is restored among the family members. The problems are resolved. Some kind person stops by and helps them by driving them to the nearest garage. Something happens that helps them break through. And I discovered that this story contains these altar moments. These moments that in the busyness of family life, the family stops down and comes to the altar of God, and they are changed. And I discovered soon that this little Christian radio program that I'm listening to as I'm driving to seminary is an altar moment. Because after I've taken the drive, I'll park the car and I'll pray. I have an altar moment. And it's very important in the floods, when it's raining, when it's dreary, to have altar moments. And so this is my sort of digression into altar moments. So I can understand very well why Noah built an altar. After being in the rain for so long, after being trapped with his children for so long, an altar is exactly what you need. He takes some of the clean animals and he sacrificed a burnt offering. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart. The narrator rarely uses God words from his heart. Rarely does he use this. The narrator, as we've discovered, our friend, the narrator, he's a subtle guy. He doesn't want you to know what he's writing about. You have to study and work hard to get truths from his text. But here, he tells you from God's heart, and that rarely occurs. So I suppose appreciate this, enjoy this. Doesn't come often. But this is a very clear message, isn't it? God's heart is pleased by this aroma. God's heart is pleased by this altar moment. You know, friends, in our own lives, God's heart is pleased by our altar moments. Even if when we come to our altar moments, we feel very broken and inadequate and pathetic. God's heart is pleased when we come to our altar moments. Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I've done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. So we here have another piece of poetry at the end of a chapter. We've seen the progression of the poetry, haven't we? The first poetry at the end of Genesis 1 is about the image of God, male and female. He created them in the image of God. He created them. At the end of chapter 2 is the poetry from Adam about Eve, bone from my bone, flesh from my flesh, woman shall be called. At the end of chapter 3 is the curse that God gives man and woman and serpent. Cursed be the land because you disobey me, etc., etc. And at the end of chapter 4 is this poetry about Lamech, the evil Lamech, and his gross vengeance. He will kill people. He'll kill a young person for injuring him. He'll avenge 77 times. And here we have at the end of chapter 9 another poetry. It's a restoration poetry. We notice the poetry has gone from good to bad to clearly wicked, to cursed to clearly wicked. And now there's a reversal. Now there's a re-covenant, a renewal of that poem. No doubt this poem is supposed to remind us of the poem at the end of the Genesis 1 narrative, because this passage in chapter 7 and 8 is a recreation. It is a reiteration of Genesis 1. In chapter 9, then, we have two segments. Verses 1 to 7 is one segment. It's the blessings for Noah. And verses 8 to 17 is the covenant to Noah. So God blesses Noah and his sons and says to be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth. Exactly the same blessing to Adam. Adam is to increase in numbers. Adam is to rule over the animals. Noah is to increase in number. Noah is to rule over the animal. It's the potency of life and the potency to rule. The same potency to life and rule that Adam has now blessed to Noah. Now, everything that lives will be for food. And that last time, Melissa pointed out that at the beginning, at the fall, even in the Garden of Eden, they are vegetarians. And now we have meat. Congratulations, you've become omnivorous. But having been omnivorous, you must not eat meat that still has its lifeblood. That's the sacredness of life. For lifeblood, there will be a demand of an accountant. There'll be demand on accounting from every animal, but also every human. I'll demand an accounting of the lifeblood of a human being. And the human being lifeblood is higher than the animal lifeblood. This has great implication, of course, for sanctity of life. In our era, the applications of this to abortion, to suicide, to homicide, to euthanasia is enormous. And beyond the scope of this lecture, because we'll be here for another 10 sessions if we went into that. So ponder that upon yourself. Whoever sheds human blood, by human shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made mankind. So this is interesting. This verse is often used, and Pastor Rob will talk about this, as a justification for capital punishment. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. Walke says it's not a judgment of vengeance, because it's not that somebody kills you, you go and kills your brother, you go and kill their brother. It's not like that, because this is really, it's given the rule of government to perform capital punishment. Now, it doesn't say whether capital punishment in government should be pursued by every government, or which government. It doesn't say that. That's not what the passage addresses. But it does, the divine rule to perform capital punishment as part of government rule is given the exemption for, if you like. The value of human life is linked to the image of God. In the image of God, God made mankind. This is a sanctity of human life. And this is a fundamental truth in the narrator's mind. It's a fundamental truth in God's mind. Now here I'm going to give a little bit of, it's not a reversal, it's a balance of what I said before. You remember the first poem, male and female. God created them in this image, created mankind in this image. Male and female, he created them. And now the sanctity of life is linked to the image of God. What that means is that male and female have equal sanctity, equal importance, because they have equal image of God. Not only so, in the second poem, Adam says, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. So woman is of equal substance to man. So women and men are equal in sanctity, equal in substance, and equal in image of God. What that means is that there's equality of the sexes despite patriarchal rule. So to be fair to the Genesis narrator, he may be a patriarch. He may be for male rule within the family structure, only a family structure, by the way. He doesn't say male rule in any other structure. We can go to the New Testament for male rule in other structures, but here only a male rule within marriage. That is given in the curse. But within this, he clearly states, despite the male rule, that male and female are equal in the sanctity of their life, in the image of God in them, and in substance, they're the same stuff. That's a clear teaching from Genesis narrator. As for you, be fruitful, increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase to it. Then God said to Noah and his sons, now I establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, all the wild animals, all that came out of the ark, every living creature. And of course, this new covenant is the rainbow. Now, I think by the time of the exile, people will know what a bow is. They'll have seen a bow. A bow is this weapon which is shoot an arrow. And the curved side of the bow is always pointing at the enemy. The rainbow is a bow pointing away from us towards the sky. And so this is the sign that God's judgment and anger is now pointing away from us. So never again will waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears, I will see and remember the everlasting covenant. So God's memory is very good. He remembers Noah, and he remembers this covenant. So now we have the sons of Noah. The sons of Noah who came up with the ark was Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah, and they came from the people who scattered all over the earth. Noah, a man of the soil. Here again, a repetition of the Genesis creation narrative, because the word soil is Adamah in Hebrew, a word we get Adam's name from. So literally, Noah, a man of the Adamah, the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of his wine, he became drunk and laid uncovered in his tent. Now again, the Genesis narrator doesn't tell us whether this is good or bad. No, not directly. But I think if we read the story, we'll gather that drunkenness is bad. In general, drunkenness is bad. Drinking wine is not bad, but getting drunk is bad. And when you're drunk enough to be naked, that's bad. So we will pick it up that this is a bad thing, that Noah has done something wrong. But the sadder thing on the theological point is this point. The promised seed fails. All this effort to wipe out all the evil in the world, to get down to one remnant family. And what happens? That one remnant family fails. And this is the repeated history of the narration. I mean, by the time you get to the king's narrative, you're frustrated by this recurrent failure. Israel fails again and again and again. Abraham fails. Jacob fails. Isaac fails. Everybody fails. It's one after another. David fails. Solomon fails. Everybody fails. All the chosen seed. Almost, it's like this Genesis narrator is playing with us. Every time we come to a great point, he builds an altar. He has a great covenant. The next story, he fails. Every time it's like this. Adam is put in the garden. He's the priest there. And then what happens? Eve feeds him the fruit. Noah comes out. He there's an altar. 3 sons. It's great. What happens? He gets drunk and naked. Every time. The only time it doesn't fail is Jesus Christ, who walks to the cross to die. Who walks to the cross to die. In the eyes of the world, he has failed miserably. But in fact, the one who dies a horrific, unjust death is the one who doesn't fail. And it's the only one who doesn't fail. So this is another subtle answer to Helen's question. As we ponder the one and only one who doesn't fail, the one and only one who truly walks faithfully with God all the way through, how does it end for the one and only one who truly walks all the way through? And of course, it's very important, because that answers also how we walk faithfully with God. Where the master goes, shall not the servant follow? I'm afraid the answer is not a good answer for Helen. The answer is that we are only asking the question, why do they die? Because we've been taken on by the worldview that, all things have begun by blessing and goodness. But in fact, the Son of God who follows faithfully ends up dead. And it is the same Son of God who tells us now, take up the cross and follow me. Take up this image of Roman crucifixion and death and follow me. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his 2 brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took the garment and laid it across their shoulders, and they walked in backwards to cover their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father naked. When Noah woke up from the wine and found out what his youngest son has done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of the slaves. Will he be to his brothers?" He also said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory, and may Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be the slaves of Japheth." A critical text. So, obviously, Noah sinned, and he ended up being naked, drunk. But Ham sinned further, because having seen the shame of his father, he went and told others about it, instead of covering his father's shame. Shem and Japheth covered their father's shame. And notice the detail that the Genesis narrator, our good friend, the Genesis narrator, gives us. They took a garment, laid it across their shoulders, walked it backwards, covered their father's naked body, their faces turned away. The amount of detail that's put in the text tells us how carefully and how important and how shameful the father's nakedness is. And that tells us, that contrasts how Ham was completely careless and callous about his father's shame. And no wonder when Noah wakes up, then curse Canaan. But you ask the question, why curse Canaan? Why not curse Ham? Well, the answer, because in chapter 9, verse 1, Ham is already blessed by God, and you can't curse what God has blessed. Remember Balaam's donkey. You can't curse what God has blessed. So Ham is already blessed by God, so he can only curse Canaan. Lowest slaves will he be to his brothers. Here there's a separation of the non-elect from the elect. By this act, once again, the three sons are separated. One non-elect seed line, the other elect line. And even within the elect line is further divided into the Shem line and the Japheth line. I've mentioned this before, and this is a warning for all of us who read Genesis, that this verse 25, cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers. For almost 200 years, this verse has been used to justify the African-American slave trade. Let me show you a little bit of something else I have here. So I'm going to change. I hope that you can see this. So after this, of course, the people spread out. Oh, I think my screen has hanged again. Oh, no, there it is. Okay. So this is what happens. In the middle here, of course, is Israel, which is just to the right of the Red Sea here. Okay. And you will see basically the three sons moved in three different directions. And so Japheth is often taken to be Europeans. Shem is really the Eastern Arab territory. And Ham moves to Africa. So based on this geographic movement, then the Europeans justified at the beginning, Europeans used this verse to say, well, you're Canaan, Canaan is here, and so you should be slaves to Europe. And of course, Americans, they come from Europe, so you should be slaves to Americans. This is justification. So coming back to, okay. Sorry, I'm not broadcasting again. Let me go back to my Zoom and start my broadcast again. Okay, so this verse, for 200 years, the church has used this verse to justify the abuse and shipping and killing and beating of African slaves to serve American cotton plantation owners and what have you. The extent to which this is accepted into the culture is quite shocking. You might have heard the changing of the name of Rhode Island recently. So Rhode Island's full name is Rhode Island and the Providence Plantation. And they now want to remove Providence Plantation from the state name. You know how ironic Providence Plantation is? Providence is what Genesis is about. It's God's providence to people. And they were so sure that they were under God's providence that in this Providence Plantation on Rhode Island, they used this verse to make use of the descendants of Canaan, the African slaves, to work their plantation. And that name retains till today. And now it's being put up into law to consider removing the Providence Plantation part of the state name of Rhode Island. So, but it goes to show how wrong you can be about interpreting scripture. And the importance of always looking at scripture with a specific viewpoint that's reasonable. And I said there are three reasonable viewpoints to read Genesis. One is as Moses writing to the people about to go into promised land. Second is the reading we're doing now as the Genesis narrator writing for exiles from Israel. And finally, we can read it through the New Testament eyes. But we must read it with one set of eyes. Otherwise, we end up with this kind of interpretation that everybody else can accept as a good reading, which nowadays we always say is not. Oops. So, hold on. I've lost my annotation. Okay, so verse 27, Japheth may live in the tents of Shem. So actually, as you saw from the map, the Japheth really went up to Europe, and Shem went to Arabia, and Japheth never really lived in the tents of Shem. So this prophecy seems not to have been fulfilled until Jesus. So when finally Japheth living in the tents of Shem happens, when Europeans come back to Jerusalem to worship, so-called Jerusalem to worship, is when Jesus comes and Europeans become Christian. So that's actually fulfilled much later than we thought. And Canaan may be the place of Japheth. After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Noah lived a total of 950 years and then he died. Oh, we get a ring here. Noah lived a total of 950 years and then he died. We've heard this before, the very first lesson, you remember. This repetitive refrain, this structure formularic genealogy from chapter 5 is now repeated for us. And in fact, this comes from 532. So what the narrator has done is chopped up this genealogy right from the very end, the very last slice. He put it down all the way to chapter 9, verse 28. And we had a break from chapter 5, verse 32 to here. Then we have the table of nations. This is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood. So there is a break in the time scale, in the chronology of the story, you realize. Because as we read the genealogy of the Toldot of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, we realize that these people are moving out into different lands, into different tribes. And these tribes are spread out all over the place. And of course, if this is to happen, it means Babel must have already happened. So the Genesis narrator has picked up this piece of genealogy, which should come much later. It should come after the Tower of Babel at least, and put it earlier. This is what is known as anachronistic. There's a break in the timeline in the story. The narrator has deliberately broken the timeline and shifted something else in. Now, when he does that, he's trying to make a point. He's trying to make a specific point. I did a little bit of that in the first class, remember. I broke up chapter 5 and put it into the beginning to make the point of what Genesis is. So the Genesis narrator is also doing something like that. He's breaking this up to make a point. And so when we read this, we need to listen out and say, why is this place here? What is the point of this being here? What is the importance of this genealogy? So the sons, it's divided into 3 segments. The Japhethites after Japheth, the Hamites after Ham, and the Shemites after Shem. Okay? So the Japhethites, verse 2, the son of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, Tiras. The son of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Ripas, Togarmah. The son of Javan, Elash, Tarshish, the Kittites, and the Rodanites. Okay, so several things to pick up here. We said that Japheth is the group that moved up northwest and eventually into Europe. So this group, although he was the good son, is also a non-elect group because the elect group is in Shem. It's interesting that as early as this, we have some tribes that are still here today. For example, Ashkenaz is a group, it becomes a family name. And if you're a medical person, you will know that the Ashkenaz are famous for carrying the gene for Mediterranean fever, familial Mediterranean fever. And they carry this gene almost exclusively. And so when you see this disease and you're trying to diagnose disease, you trace back to the Ashkenaz gene. So Some of these tribes that are described here are still present on earth now, and we trace their descendants to today. So that's kind of a little bit out there information for you. But all these people actually spread into the Mediterranean basin in Europe about that. But it says in verse 5, from these people, they each have their own language. So the narrator is telling you they each have their language. This is after Babel. He's deliberately pointing out to you, he's broken the timeline. The sons of Ham: Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. Very significant sons of Ham. The reason, of course, they belong to the empires of Babylonian, Egyptian, Assyrian, and Canaanites. What are these names? What do they mean to the Israel people in exile? Well, Babylon and Assyrians are the two people who exiled the Israelites. Egyptians took them to be slaves for 430 years. And of course, Canaanites are the recurrent group that gets them into idolatry. Bingo, 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 bingo. The four worst peoples in the world are the four sons of Ham. You cannot have a worse recommendation for this man than having four sons that are from Babylon, Egypt, Assyria, and Canaan, okay? This is the worst CV you've ever seen. The sons of Cush: Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Raama, Sabteka, and the sons of Ramah are Sheba and Dedan. Now these are significant. Why are we focusing on Cush? Because Cush is the worst of the lot. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who becomes a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, on this verse, we may come to think, pretty good, this guy Nimrod. The English language has got it wrong. Nimrod's obviously kind of insulting name. You don't call your friend in school Nimrod, okay? Ben does not call his friend in school Nimrod. He calls his enemy in school Nimrod. So maybe the English language has got it wrong, but Nimrod's really a good guy. He's a mighty warrior. He's a mighty hunter. He's going to bring good game to your barbecue, right? The narrator doesn't make it entirely clear just by saying this. Although if we knew Hebrew, we will sense there's a problem because the word Nimrod in Hebrew means rebel. So that can't be good. But the narrator is going to make it clear. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Uku, Akkad, and Kene in Shinar. Babylon, of course, red flags are going off left, right, and center. This is the country that ultimately exiled the Israelites. From that land, he went to Assyria, the other country that exiled them. There he built Nineveh. Nineveh, do we know Nineveh? We know Nineveh. Jonah was sent to Nineveh. Nineveh is the most wicked city outside Sodom and Gomorrah. And just in case you haven't got that, Sodom and Gomorrah is coming next. And so this is Cush. Cush creates Nimrod, a mighty hunter, a mighty warrior. But from the cities that Cush built, Babylon, Assyria, Nineveh, we know the Genesis narrator's viewpoint of Nimrod and Cush. Not good. This is bad. And Nimrod, he's this mighty warrior. Yes, he's a mighty warrior. He's a mighty hunter. But he's not a good person. He's evil. The world always looks to might. It looks to people who are strong and powerful and looks up to them. The mighty hunter who can bring the barbecue meat. But God doesn't look like this. The Genesis narrator doesn't look like this. The Genesis narrator looks like genealogy and what evil his genealogy brings. And if your line goes down to Assyria, Babylon, and Nineveh, no good. Egypt was the father of Ludites, Anamites, Lehabites, Naphtalites, Pathrusites, and Casluhites, from which the Philistines come from. You notice this passage is just basically telling you all the bad people. You know the Philistines. In the Samuel narrative, David fought against the Philistines. The judges fought against the Philistines. Samson was captured by the Philistines. Gideon was troubled by the Philistines. Deborah fought against the Philistines. Bad news to Philistines, okay? Here we have Canaan was the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and the Hittites and Jebusites. So Jebusites, of course, were the people who end up in Jerusalem. But this is not a particular good thing either. Because the Jebusites, as you read later on in Judges, they don't really do justice to living in Jerusalem, although they do become the inhabitants of Jerusalem in the end. Later, the Canaanites can scatter towards the borders of Canaan, reach Sidon towards Gerar as far as Gaza, towards another two cities that you might heard of, Sodom and Gomorrah. When we look at this group of people under Ham, we have Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, Canaan, Nimrod, Nineveh, Philistines, Sodom, Gomorrah. Almost every evil city you can name in the Bible is here. The point of this narrative is that this bad seed, this Ham, turns out to create all the baddies in the rest of Scripture. That's how bad it is. And so lest we think being strong, being a Hag-Giborim, a strong man, a Nimrod is good. It's not. So you remember this Nimrod is kind of the same sort of word, the mighty hunter. This image, we've seen it before. We've seen it before in the genealogy, that there are these people who are, when just before in the Janus segment, coming into the Noah story. We've seen this before. We've seen from the line of Cain, there comes mighty hunters, there come Hag-Giborim, these strong people, these strong men, the Nephilim, who is born of the sons of gods with the daughters of men. Those were the heroes, translated in IV, the word Hag-Giborim. Nimrod is another Hag-Giborim. And again, the Genesis narrator wants to tell you Hag-Giborim is not good. The Semites are the ones born to Shem. And this is a very interesting genealogy. Whose older brother was Japheth. He reminds us of the older brother Japheth. And immediately, Shem was the ancestors of all the sons of Eber. Here, we have another break in chronology, because Eber is out of order. If you counted the order according to the line, so verse 22 tells you Shem was the father of Arphaxad, okay? And later on we pick up Arphaxad was the father of Shelah, okay? And Shelah is the father of Erba, which means right at the beginning of this genealogy, we've jumped straight from Shem to Erba. We've jumped 1, 2, 3, 2 generations. At the beginning of a genealogy, we are named the father of all those in this tribe, and immediately we're told two things. One, he's the younger brother of Japheth, and secondly, he's immediately linked to 3 generations later, Erba. Why Erba? So obviously this genealogy is about Erba, nothing else. The only thing that matters is Erba, because that's what he's done. And you can see, even as he traces the genealogy focuses on tracing Erba. Sons of Shem is listed. Here are the 5 sons. Aram is given 4 sons, and then the son that Erba comes from is listed, and given one son is given another son, and we aim straight to Erba. It's almost like drawing an arrow pointing straight into Erba. That's the point of this genealogy. Why? 2 sons were born to Erba. One was named Peleg, and the other Joktan. Peleg means division in Hebrew. Joktan means nothing, by the way, or not going anywhere. And this is the reason why it's aiming straight at Eber. Because at Eber, he has 2 sons. One is division, and by his name, we know this is where the line divides. The line divides into Peleg, which is the father, which eventually goes to Abraham. So that's the point. As I told you, the Genesis narrator is interested in where the seed goes. In the genealogy of Ham, he's interested to tell you how evil that line is. In the genealogy of Shem, the only interest is to trace it to Abraham, to mix seed and line. Joktan doesn't matter, but we're given him. How do we know Joktan doesn't matter? You figured it out? He has 13 sons, okay? All the good people have 12 sons. You should stop at 12. You shouldn't have number 13. You should control your desire, because number 13, not good. It means you're not getting anywhere. That's a little bit of a joke, okay? But the Genesis narrator does use numbers to illustrate things. And you'll find, as you read these genealogies, people have 12 sons. They always have 12 sons. They might have to skip a few sons to make it 12 sons, but the good people have 12 sons. Israel has 12 sons. Nahor has 12 sons. Everybody has 12 sons. You have 13 sons, no good. You're not going anywhere. Bye-bye, Joktan. Okay, I'm crossing him out. The region where they live stretched from Mesha to Shephar in the eastern hill country. We've listed this out to you. That's where the sons go. And the sons of Shem by the clans and languages, again, the suggestion of languages, which is after the Tower of Babel. These are the clans of Noah's sons, according to the sons. But we notice in all of these, we have 70 sons listed from Noah. 70 is the Hebrew number of perfection, completeness. So this is the listing of his genealogy. And the reason why we've taken this before Babel is to tell you the consequence of Noah. This is the outcome of Noah. The outcome of Noah is one line is extremely evil and produces all the evil seed against Israel. On the other line is this line of division, which one part of it goes to the holy seed Abraham. That's what it's trying to tell you. So we're going to pick up, we're running a bit slower than usual, no worries. We're going to pick up a little bit about the parallel between Adam and Noah. Just to remind you of the parallel. In Genesis 1, there's the Ruah Elohim, the wind of God on the water. In Genesis 8:2, there's the wind on the water. There's a 7-day cycle of creation in Genesis 1. There's a 7-day warning of the coming of the flood in Genesis 9. There's 2 triads, stage of creation in the Genesis creation narrative. And there's 2 triads of the flooding and receding. 3 things happen. God giving them instructions, the ark being entered, the floodwater rise. Floodwater comes back, the ark being exited, God giving instructions. It's a triad image. There's the image of God that's mentioned in the creation narrative. And again, in 9:6, there's the image of God given to Noah. Adam works with the soil, and in 9:20, Noah works with the soil and gets drunk. Adam eats the fruit and sins, and in 3:6 of Genesis, and Noah drinks and causes sin in Genesis 9:21. Both become naked. Adam becomes naked when he realizes he's naked, and Noah becomes naked after he gets completely drunk. God clothes Adam in Genesis 3:21, and Noah is clothed by his son in Genesis 9:23. Adam has 3 sons, Cain, who is cursed, and Seth, who's the seed. And Noah has 3 sons, Ham, who's cursed, and Shem, who ends up the seed. Cain's line has Enoch, a city named after Cain's son. And in Ham's line, there's Nimrod, who builds the city Nineveh. The condemned line builds a city. You can see the huge parallel between these. Noah is the second time the creation narrative comes. Noah is the second Adam. Of course, this actually pushes through because ultimately, the second Adam who does it right is not Noah, but Jesus. I've hinted at this all the way through the talk. So last bit, Tower of Babel. Now the whole world has one language and one common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. In this passage, notice the word language. Language is key to this. And also, this is a break, obviously, because we have this Babel narrative between the other genealogy of Shem, which we'll come to in chapter 12. As people move eastward in the plains of Shinar, they settled there. They say to each other, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They use bricks instead of stone, tar for mortar. And they say, let us build a city. So these are good things, you know. Language, technology, architecture, these are all good things. But in the story of the Tower of Babel, they become bad things. And what makes them bad is the motive. They want to make a name for themselves. They are afraid that they will be scattered. But by the way, God's purpose for them is to scatter, multiply, and go out. They don't want God's plan. They fear God's plan. It's a sobering thought to us. In a world where we are always told we must build for ourselves something. That's almost a natural teaching by these, our teachers, literally. Teach us we must build something. In a world where we fear following God, it's very important. But the Lord came down, again, the investigatory God, we've mentioned this before, and saw the building. And he says, they're speaking one language, so let us confuse their language. And then the Lord scattered them from building. And they scattered all over the earth. They got dispersion and confusion out of this. Of course, we have to see the New Testament parallel passages, the Pentecost, where the language of this dispersal is reversed. Now, by the Spirit, they can understand their own tongue. So there's a reversal of this. So we come to 11:9, and that's the reading for today. We'll pick up from after this, because this next passage will become chiastic again. So we'll pick up that next time. So I've written the questions, but it's very difficult. So Ian, I think, has an easier version of the questions for you to answer. So maybe I'll leave the questions to him as he goes into the breakout group.
Yes, we do. Thank you very much, Eugene.
Okay.
Well, that was...
I'm going to stop sharing and let Ian have the
okay.
screen back.
That's a meaty lesson today. So everybody, we're now going to go into a breakout discussion. Okay. Tonight, our facilitators are Letty, Edith, Anne, Melissa, and I'm standing in for Joey, who could not make it tonight. And if we're in our groups, if there's any sharing for the whole group involved, please go in alphabetical order by your first names. And we'll have 20 minutes until 8:55, at which time we will have Pastor Rob Penner give us some reflections on this study tonight. If you have time left after discussion, please pray for each other. 2 minutes before we end, I will send out a reminder, and there'll be a 1-minute countdown. I will send out the 2 questions into your message room, so you actually be able to see the 2 questions, hopefully. I've never tried that. And please turn your cameras on out of respect for your facilitator, and you'll be unmuted upon entry. So we're going into our breakout groups now.